in the portion, the Torah portion called Acharei-Kedoshim. Torah is speaking about the sons of Aaron who at the conclusion of the dedication of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, were so inspired, they were so ecstatic that they went into the Holy of Holies with a fire that consumed them and they died. The way it's understood on a more spiritual level, they died from the ecstasy. The ecstasy was so intense and so strong that their souls left their body. Moshe referred to that as extreme holiness. He said to Aaron, whose two sons had just died, I guess they are holier than us. But then God says to Aaron, tell your children who are going to be the priests, who are going to offer all the services and all the sacrifices in the tabernacle and then later in the temple that Solomon built, tell them to never do that again. Never get so ecstatic that you actually leave your body and expire. This is a little similar in some way to the story with Avraham and the Akedah, the binding of Yitzchak. God is testing Avraham. And he says, sacrifice your son. And Avraham is ready to do it. But then God says, no. This is just a test. Should it be a real emergency, you will hear a steady sound. This is just a test to see how devoted you are. But sacrifice your child? Never. Meaning, God asks Avraham to sacrifice his child. Seemingly, God is saying, if a soul can leave the body and go back to heaven for a holy purpose, that's the greatest and the best thing that could possibly happen. Because after all, heaven is heavenly. Heaven is greater than earth. To be a soul without a body is holier than a soul in a body. Which is why people believed in human sacrifice. It wasn't murder. It wasn't wasting or destroying a life. It was returning life to its proper milieu. Souls belong in heaven, not on earth. Of course, you're not allowed to destroy life, but this is elevating life. Okay. So the message to Avraham was, staying in the body is the right thing. And there is no virtue in going to heaven. And therefore, you may not sacrifice your physical existence for some spiritual benefit. Very powerful statement. You may not sacrifice your physical existence for spiritual benefit. Well, that tells you that you can't actually kill yourself or others in order to go to heaven. The sons of Aaron did not kill themselves, and nobody killed them. They allowed themselves to become so ecstatic, so drunk on holiness that they expired. Nobody knew that that was forbidden. No one knew that that was not a good idea. So now God says, don't ever do that again. What are we learning now? Not that you can't destroy physical life for the benefit of spirituality, but spirituality cannot ever become that intense if it leads to death. What they have in common is life on earth is where we're supposed to be. On the other hand, giving up your life for your belief is a very respectable thing. The same Avraham, who was told not to sacrifice his son, is applauded for the fact that he risked his life to teach the oneness of God at a time when everybody believed in idols, and he knew that they were going to kill him for that. And it didn't stop him. So here we see sacrificing your life, like martyring yourself for God, for godly purpose, is admirable. So which is it? So the first thing we should notice is this. God keeps saying to us, I want you on earth in a body. Stay healthy. Stay alive. Don't let spiritual desire, passion, ecstasy, don't let it kill you. That's God talking about our lives. We, on the other hand, respond by saying, but to us, your will and your commandments are much more important than my life, so I'm willing to give up my life for your mitzvah. So God is saying, I will overlook the mitzvah in order to keep you alive, and we say, I'll overlook my life in order to keep your mitzvah. That's a very beautiful, romantic scenario. Huh? God says, your life is more important to me than my mitzvah. And we say, oh, your mitzvah is much more important to us than our lives. How do we resolve this? Which way is it? Is life on earth more important or not? Is it right for a person to feel, I would gladly give up my life if it serves God's purpose? Good idea? Interesting thing. There's a commandment concerning Shabbos, specifically concerning the laws of Shabbat. You may not perform any of the 39 labors, building, cooking, starting a fire. But if a person is seriously ill, dangerously ill, then you are allowed to dig, and you are allowed to cook, and you are allowed to do all of those 39 labors in order to save the life. What is it about Shabbos that gets this special attention? We were already told all the mitzvahs are set aside if life is at stake. The general statement is, God says, these are the commandments you should keep and live by them. Meaning, live by them, don't die on account of them. The mitzvahs are there to get more life out of life, not to end life. So we have that general rule concerning all the commandments. If you're starving and your life is in danger and the only thing you have to eat is pork, you eat the pork. That's the instruction. It's not license to sin, it's instruction to protect life. So why is it that when it comes to Shabbos, we have this special emphasis? As Rambam puts it, a person should hasten to violate Shabbos in order to save a life. The example that the Talmud gives, if a person is buried under rubble in a earthquake or something, you don't know whether he's alive or not. Are you allowed to dig him out on Shabbat? The answer is yes, and you should hasten to do it. But what if he's not alive anymore? If there's a chance, even a slim chance, that he might be alive, you do the labor, the forbidden labor, you do it on Shabbat and save the life. Why do we need all that emphasis? We already know that all the commandments are set aside in an emergency. a legitimate emergency. See, here's what the Rebbe says. There is something about Shabbat that is different from other commandments. God says to the Jewish people, I am giving you this mitzvah of observing the rest, the day of rest, which is my day of rest, and I'm asking you to keep it with me because this is a sign, this is like an announcement to the world that you and I have a special bond. In other words, when God told us that we are the chosen people, what is the sign? How is that expressed? In our not being allowed to work on Shabbat because God is not working on Shabbat. Now that is an exception to a universal principle. The universal principle is God is a creator. And God created us in his image, which means we are also creators, partners with God in creation. Therefore, we must always be creative, productive, and improving the world at all times. So what is this 24-hour period where we're not allowed to be creative? So God says, this is an exception. Because we are so close, because of the special bond between us, when I'm resting, you rest with me. Otherwise, you're obligated to be productive and creative all the time. So non-Jews are not commanded to keep the Shabbos. On the contrary, they are commanded to be in the image of God, be creators at all times. So what does that tell us? There's a difference between putting life before the mitzvah, pikuach nefesh. The idea is the life that you might save is more precious than the commandment in God's view. So God is saying, I'm giving you commandments, but I don't want you dying for them. I want you alive. So sometimes, in a time of danger, you're going to have to violate a mitzvah in order to stay alive. This means that the commandment is still in force. When you're starving and you have to have something to eat and the only thing available is pork, you eat the pork. But the pork is still not kosher. So you're violating the mitzvah for the sake of saving a life. When it comes to Shabbos, it's not the same thing. When you work on Shabbos, perform a labor on Shabbos in order to save a life, you're not violating Shabbos at all. One of the differences might be if under duress, either a threat of death or natural death, and because of that you need to eat pork, you should eat the pork. But after the threat is over, you should repent for having eaten the pork. At least some kind of repentance. Because after all, you did something that was not allowed. It was justified, but still not a kosher thing to do. When it comes to Shabbat, we're being told that here is something different. When you perform a labor that is otherwise forbidden on Shabbat, in order to save a life, you're not violating Shabbat at all. It's not justification for violation. There is no violation. How so? The whole point of Shabbat is to emphasize the unique bond that we have with God, who wants us alive. So if you save a life on Shabbat, you're keeping Shabbat. You see, you're actually expressing the essence of Shabbat, testifying that there's a special bond between the Jews and God. So usually you testify by not performing the labor. In an emergency, you testify that there's a unique bond by performing the labor. And that way, you're actually observing Shabbat, not violating Shabbat. Now the Rebbe takes it a step further. When we have a mitzvah that is testimonial, like we observe Rosh Hashanah, testifying that it was the day, then the first day of creation. We observe Passover, commemorating the coming out of Egypt. We observe Shavuot in a few weeks, testifying, giving testimony to the fact that that's the day that God gave us the Torah. So that group of mitzvahs is called edus, testimony or remembrance. So of the three categories of mitzvahs, there are those that are rational, there are those that are mysterious, have no reason, and there are those that are testimonial. The Rebbe has often shown, this explained, that in some way all the mitzvahs are mysterious because we don't understand what God gets from the mitzvah. So when we have a mitzvah like thou shalt not murder, we say, whoa, that makes a lot of sense. Well, it makes a lot of sense to us because I hate when that happens. I don't want to be murdered. But what's in it for God? Don't steal. Don't covet your neighbor's donkey. I can see the psychological, emotional benefits of not being jealous and not wanting everything that doesn't belong to me. I understand that. What's in it for him? So ultimately, every mitzvah is his pleasure, even when it's not my pleasure or my benefit. So in some sense, even the mitzvahs that make a lot of sense have this element of mystery. On the other hand, you can also argue that even the mysterious mitzvahs make a lot of sense. God's pleasure is not the same as our pleasure. God can get pleasure from the tiniest thing that a human being ignores. I have no time for this. I can't be bothered by these details. He can. So it makes perfect sense that what gives him pleasure might not give me pleasure because I'm not him. Even in a marriage, what gives your spouse pleasure may be very mysterious to you, but that makes perfect sense. You married someone who wasn't and isn't you. So of course they're going to have their own opinion, their own tastes, their own weaknesses. Why is that surprising? So all the mitzvahs really do make sense, even though it doesn't benefit us individually in any practical way. By the same token, those mitzvahs that are testimonial, all mitzvahs are testimonial. Like that little incident that I've spoken about many times, this father whose daughter, 12-year-old girl, got it into her head that God was angry at her and she was depressed. So he asked me to speak to her, and I said, God is angry at you? She says, yeah. I said, I'm so jealous. You're 12 years old and you can get God angry? What in the world? How did you become so powerful, so important, so significant? What can a 12-year-old girl do to make God angry? So the fact that God is angry at her testifies that God has a special bond with the people he creates. It's a compliment. It's a testimony. So it's not only Shabbos, it's every mitzvah. Every time a Jew performs a mitzvah, he's acting like the chosen people. It's testimony. What's the bottom line? The bottom line is there's a certain, like mentioned earlier, certain beauty in the fact that to us, God's will is more important than our lives, and to God, our lives are more important than his will. That's a beautiful relationship. But who's right? There's no contradiction here. A human being should not put his own life before God's commandments. We're here to serve him, no other reason. So to preserve my life by not serving him makes no sense. In other words, to me, life is insignificant. I didn't ask to be born. I don't need to be here. This whole thing is a great surprise to me. So I should not take my physical existence that seriously. My spiritual life, that's important. My morals, my ethics, that's important. My continued presence, my continued existence, not important. Most religion actually teaches that. You have a body and a soul. Your soul is important. Your body is nasty, ugly, distasteful. They're at war with each other. Your body drags you down. Your soul drags you up. You're constantly in tension and opposition. It's an ongoing battle. And religion says, sacrifice your body in favor of your soul. What the Rebbe is telling us here is, God says, I want you alive because you are more important to me as a human being than my commandments. How are we supposed to react to that? Our reaction should be, well, if my life is that significant to you, then I will preserve my life. Not because I find it important, but because you find it important. So it would be very humble of me to say, my insignificant existence, I'd give it up in a minute. Beautiful. It's not what God wants. So when a person becomes so religious, so ecstatic, so orthodox, in the real meaning of the word, that it harms his health and turns him into a martyr, that is not correct thinking. It's noble, very noble and very humble. I don't see myself as an important creature, my physical self. Okay, that's your opinion, and that's good for you to have that opinion. But what should you do? You should do what God says. God says that your physical existence is important to him, and that's all you need to know. So you preserve your life. One further insight. In the laws of Shabbat, where we're told that we should violate or perform the labors, it's not really violating anything, but to perform the labor in order to save life. What is the example? The example is someone is buried under rubble. Should we dig him out? Now, if you tell me that I should cook a meal for myself because I'm dangerously ill and I need, or I should eat the pork because I am very starving and I'm very desperate, okay. But I should violate Shabbos to save someone else? It's like, let him dig himself out. It's his life. Here we find, if there is divine interest in physical life, then it doesn't matter whether it's your life you're saving or someone else's life you're saving. Because now it's not about us anymore. It's about God's opinion of life. And God's opinion of life is that life on earth is far more precious to him than life in heaven. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program, there's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below, and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.